Hello, hello, hello. Wow, everyone looks amazing. Welcome to the inaugural Club Chicxulub performance. My co-hosts, Matt Carney, Bhat, and I would love for everyone to raise our glasses in a toast to the power of speculative literature and art. This is a space to lament, to rage, for catharsis, for joy, for hope. To all the performers tonight, thank you so much for being here. And to you, our audience, thank you for being here and for co-creating this space with us. Welcome to Club Chicxulub.
ones who immigrated to Convoy Wharfs. The ferry building's clock tower chimes 12, ringing in high noon, the day we commemorate the founding of this bright, sparkling riverfront we call home. Splay away on this cushion. Stretch out your legs from yesterday's cramped pontoon ride in. Spoon this fresh out of the steamer sticky rice dumpling on your plate. You'll need it to fuel our stroll down to the water, below balconies teeming with leafy vines, and past crowds revolving in and out of glass shop fronts, clutching boxes of cream puffs, paper bags of folded barbecue pork, and delicate purses like jewels. We'll weave in between clusters of hawker bots, wheeling towards us, beeping tofu fa, beeping buy 2 for 1, beeping no change will be returned, exact change only. Snake-bite children bouncing down the streets, dressed as lions, their matted paper manes streaming in the briny breeze, and their harried parents chasing them a few steps behind. We'll stop where Billionaire Promenade begins, right under the hand-carved bronze statue of Sir Ka-shing Lee, whose wizened hands are gripped in a firm handshake with a beefy ancient British royal, King Henry VIII. This is the Convoy Wharfs you've heard about, a celebrated marriage of the Orient and the Occident, the port of possibilities. What was once formerly a 40-acre dump, closed off to the public for 600 years, has been revamped by Sir Lee into a tangible, modern oasis. Finished with breakfast yet? Emptied the glass of guava juice? Come, slide on your slippers and let's head out. Don't worry about packing masks, hand sanitizers, or bleach wipes. The entire town is hosed down every 2 hours by caretakers, those shuffling beige androids that blend into the scenery. They're tasked with keeping us disinfected, alongside our other custodians programmed to eliminate dust, waste, and debris from our midst. Each window glimmers in the sun. Each bench glistens during the day, and our ground is free of pet excrement and withered leaves. Bump into someone and they'll bow and apologize. Leave your wallet in a taxi and the driver will circle back to restore it. Visit a post office to hold your mail and the staff will throw in several free moving boxes. Our terrace housing and vast open spaces stretch perpendicular to the riverbank, from Surrey Keys to the west and Greenwich in the east, melding our old ways with the new. At every corner sits a cappuccino bar or a cha-chang-tang, a grocery store stocked with organic cabbage, or a wet market selling wild turtles. And near the center, we have the only cinema complex for miles in our borough. We pray with white candles and incense sticks, usher in the new year with firecrackers and red envelopes, and marry in both churches and Grand Hotel ballrooms. Still, we fling off our shoes before entering our quarters, wriggle out of jeans into pajamas the moment we land on our couches, and string our freshly washed undergarments across clotheslines from one shiny flat to another. Beneath the gray skies, we've laid bare our possessions for all to see but not touch. The parks, the playgrounds, the humble abodes. There is enough to go around here, assigned equally as promised, but our clothes, our stuffed animals, and our things, well, they are ours to keep. They ruse up a fuzzy sensation in our gut, akin to lying down after a hearty meal with family, reassuring us of our right to possess the items we can trace our fingers around and hold, to sell or to buy, the choice to make and unmake our commitments. In kindergarten, our children learn of the conquests made by brave kings and queens, divinely birthed from this small island, before recounting the names of successful entrepreneurs from our old world delivered by circumstance. Who are we to judge the content of someone's dream? It is not important that Sir Lee and King Henry were not alive in the same century, but it is of great importance that they were chosen to represent our town. One clamored his way to lead an empire, while the other was born an autocrat. One chopped off the heads of his wives, and the other one remained unmarried before becoming widowed. One constructed vessels on this very soil for expansion, while the other assembled frights for people to resettle here. Both believed in the power and influence of commerce, of trade, of ensuring one's security and survival through smooth and rough swells. Had they met, they would have joined forces as formidable business partners, balancing the other one out. As our literature teachers say, the protagonist and the antagonist of a novel are often two sides of the same coin. They both want to achieve the same goal, only they have different methods of pursuing it. How should Sir Lee or King Henry be cast? Does it matter who falls on which side, so long as they deliver our existence? Our toddlers are taught to stand under this statue when separated from their families. Teenagers conceal themselves in the shadow, sucking cigarettes through hurried breaths under the watchful gaze of our civic constables, whose only act of discipline is to wag their fingers as a mere warning. Relatives learn to collect their forgetful, aging in-laws nearby this beacon of hope. Nobody is ever lost for long. Crime is absent, and rightly so. What would we be upset about? Why would we need to protest? What do we, as jovial, carefree adults, have to murder, steal, or cheat for? Throw back a drunken punch outside of a bar, and both parties will get arrested. Spit at a waiter at Emcee and start packing your bags. Copy your friend's English homework at school and risk expulsion. Brackets. Convoy Wharfs is not a destination, but a 5-year vestibule, a glossy track out of stagnant, decaying metropolises. Once upon a time, we had to apply to come here, twiddled our thumbs for several decades before some thin-lipped bureaucrat approved of our move. Then we'd liquidate our bank accounts, stocks, and bonds to pay rent, until we discovered another way to permanently remain in another country. Brackets close. See those cameras mounted by the palm trees? Don't be nervous, they hold us accountable. We're encouraged to think, speak, and behave without restrictions, so as long as those ideas, words, and actions do not oppress, exclude, or harm another. Older Wharfians occasionally huff and scoff at what they call politically correct and democracy, but forgive them. Their memories are failing, thus their tongues loosen over time. Such is the curse of senescence, and our longevity depends on our ability to unclasp ourselves from instances that curdle our blood. If everyone is free, then we must tolerate those freedoms and live harmoniously with lenience. No one cares if your son falls in love with another man. No one will chastise your daughter tanning by the pool. No one will even blink when your child brings home a partner with skin as deep as coffee. No one is richer, more valued, or more worthy than the other. How can we be when we all share the same heritage? At some point, if we trace back far enough to whomever gave us these bulbous noses, these furry caterpillar eyebrows, these coarse bushels of hair, we'd eventually uncover a common descendant from the same bloodline. So, we continue calling each other's brothers, sisters, cousins, aunties, and uncles, and trust that just punishment is dulled for our greater good. We wouldn't dare push our luck to be exiled once again. One strike is enough. Early banishment is final. Final banishment is death. Our books tell us of fragrant harbor, once named Victoria, once the backwatered fishing village off the coast of China, the place which Convoy Wharfs is modeled after. Our legends speak of our ancestors' endurance, mounting stilt shacks near Red Silt, since social status was measured by the altitude of one's residence, and status was only granted to our colonizers, sleeping in mansions on top of mountains. Our people were required to host their lamps up, revealing their faces when passing at night, or else deemed as criminals and shunned from stepping foot inside carpeted restaurants. Our elders smacked their mouths and wet their lips when reciting dishes from our past cuisine, sautéed over gas heaters in the streets, like fried shrimp and salted egg yolk that melted on our tongues like butter, and razor clams that would overfill buckets before splitting into half moons when tossed in searing woks. They relate stories about men like us, hurtling on packed roads to sky-high offices, or women grasping onto their pregnant bellies while scaling hills, or children as young as 5, climbing aboard minibuses that whisked through traffic, dumping them in front of school. Stories about how we soon occupied those apartments on the tallest peaks, installed lampposts on every winding road, and owned those carpeted restaurants to serve those like us once snubbed. Stories of speed and thriving in flux, of futile attempts to resist change in motion. Why fight the force of wind when we can be carried? Our ancestors were aware of the precarity of a fast-paced city life, of overlapping moments we shared before we yearned for separate opportunities elsewhere, lured by the promise of gold. We watch movies of these mirrors of ourselves, where laughing is accompanied by knee slaps, by tipping mahjong tables over, by tossing sucked clean crab legs onto dirty plates, back when nobody cared how loud joy can ring. Here at the Wharfs, we've tried to recreate what we've heard. Thank you.
A grief that shatters oceans. One day, we all woke up in black robes, all across the oceans, every human, connected in a way we'd never been visibly before. We tried to take them off. They wouldn't budge. The robes were so horribly inconvenient for our modern lives, bulky, loose, tripping our feet, trapping us in heavy weighted wrappings. We could not be free of them. They made our prior concerns look ridiculous. Even the new arguments, too. Each expert in invective, hair, and makeup couldn't argue their way out of the robes. They continued to drag themselves into their studios to blast as much blame outward about who brought the robes upon us. But nothing anyone said or did could rid them of a robe. Even the top 10 people in the world couldn't pay or talent their way out of them. Everyone, finally, trapped, all in it together. Except wearing a robe didn't keep anyone from dying. Illness still raged. So many of us still died. Everyone shuffled around in our individual robe prisons, which seemed to serve no purpose. People were drowning in the robes. As the days passed, we talked less. Even when people got the chance, we touched each other less. The robes were between us. Even our skin turned a little gray in the sun, no matter the tone of it before. We faded. We shuddered. Eventually, we went about our days not only not speaking, we walked about with our mouths closed, breathed with mouths closed. We couldn't open our mouths because if we did, we would scream and never stop. People felt like life was nothing but an exquisite torture. And those were the lucky ones. They were the first to inhabit their robes. The people who felt at home in their robes were the beginners, the ones who started to do things that seemed strange at first. Moving about gracefully in the robes, how dare they? People who started talking again, but to say things no one wanted to hear. Things like, "My, this robe is actually quite comfortable," or "There's really a lot of room in here if you think about it." The unlucky ones were the people who shunned the beginners. They were the enders. They continued trying to argue and party and block their way out of any self-reflection or awareness of feelings. It was easier to fight, to blame, to debate, than feel. Then feel how soft the robes were, or feel how free their legs actually moved in the robes. Then feel who the robes could make them become. Is there space in a prison beyond the walls? But these enders were understandable. How could you feel special as a person if you couldn't feel separate? In time, everyone could see them for what they were. They were like the last bit of tail writhing around from an earthworm that's been cut, going nowhere with the desire to be anywhere but here. The beginner went outside and started calling. Other people came to see what was going on, and standing there, in their robes, they felt something plain and old. They looked out across the crowd of people and saw mostly dour robes. Women and children looked at the beginner and cried. Men joined, howling and wailing. Across towns, across cities, people came out. They stood and sobbed and kept lamenting. Across countries, continents, shrouded people stood outside and wept. The robes felt right. The only place the voice could really rise from to say the only thing left that needed to be said. Even in parts of the world in darkness, the voices rose, until even the last ender was outside. Even if he was trying to raise his voice louder than the others, he couldn't. And it didn't matter even if he could. The total voices finally held power. We all caterwauled, all people in robes black as cauldrons, our bodies vanishing, only solemn faces. Finally, no room for business. Just beyond the keening of all the people rang the sound of animals. Cats, dogs, and birds were the first to join. Dolphins poked their heads above water and chittered. Whales, turtles, sharks, and sea lions squealed and rumbled. All creatures, great and small, entered the cacophony. The insect buzz alone started to overtake the voice of the people. Satellite images of the Earth from that time show a strange pattern of darkness on land areas. The robes, visible from space. The images show a rhythm breaking over the oceans. A ripple that first waved over the blue earth, settling into an atmospheric disturbance, a vibration of a hologram ring looping around the world. Everyone had been moaning and keening for a long time. The Ender needed to wail for long enough until he was all wailing in a robe, and only wailing in a robe, and could remember nothing else. Mysterious how no one lost their voice during this time. When our voices converged, it was a boost of energy. We felt better than we had in years. When asked later what this felt like, people said, spiritual, natural, connected, as one, a world, total and complete. A cycle fulfilled. The beginner stopped. She had been bawling long enough in a robe until she was finally more than bawling in a robe and could remember everything else. And so it went. People and animals around the whimpering world quieted in waves and went back inside. The ocean stilled. The atmospheric ring disappeared. The earth was the earth again. Everyone and everything hibernated. When people awoke, we found a new surprise. The robes were gone, but out of our bodies grew trees. Roots tingled from the feet to the waist. A trunk and branches burst out of our backs. Birches, oaks, pines, maple. Leaves and needles followed. The earth slept. She slept long enough until she was all resting and only resting and remembered everyone else. Thank you.
And they were ashamed. Uncle Draco the dragon rolled on down from the star pool to get a gander at his brother Joe's fancy new terrarium, to visit with all his nieces and nephews, so freely frolicking, feasting, and fucking among the shimmering foliage of the world, without a care or concern as to how or why they should be so lucky to do so. After a week had passed, Uncle Draco quietly led the kids to the grove of apple trees in the furthest corner of the terrarium, while Papa Joe was napping, naturally. And Papa Joe hadn't really mentioned anything about this part of the terrarium other than to say it was still under construction, and therefore off limits. Uncle Draco pulled down 2 apples, one red and one blue. He presented both of them to his nieces and nephews and said, "Your father hasn't explained to all of you that the world is bigger than just this vibrant paradise you live in. And why should you wonder about such things when your bellies are always full, when your thirst is always quenched by the dizzying ambrosia that pours from the fountains your father built for you, when your sleep is always warm, and there are always arms to hold you when you fall? But all is not as it seems. For being here, I have seen those times when your beautiful bodies stand, nay, strain against the boundary which your father told you not to cross. I have seen many of you staring at the harvests of the forbidden forests while you thoughtlessly explore and caress each other's chakric coils. And why shouldn't you know the taste of the earth's pungent sweet? Why shouldn't you come to know all the strange wonders which inhabit the whole of the world, of which your garden, where you are all essentially well-fed slaves, is but a small portion? So here, As your uncle, who loves you as much, if not more, than your father, I give you this choice. Feast upon the blue apple, and you shall never have to wonder again what lies beyond the terrarium, and you shall spend the rest of all existence in the only perpetual dream you have ever known. Or instead feast from the red apple, and you will find the knowledge which will allow you, all of you, to reach beyond the terrarium, to run down that mystery that haunts you in your sweetest dreams. You will come to possess the key which will allow all of you to undertake the glorious adventure of your own freedom. Uncle Draco was so warm and charming and generous with his offer that all of Papa Joe's beautiful children feasted on all of the red apples, on all of the red apple trees in the terrarium, and it was as great and golden and orgiastic a feast as had ever occurred in this dimension. A cornucopia of sticky, sweet amber juices flowing down beautifully curved bodies, soft pillows of rich light condensed into flesh, melting among a sudden convulsion of savagely gnashing teeth, biting, touching, hitting, caressing, copulating, and consuming until sated. And afterwards, lying together in a great huddled postcoital mass, knowledge came to the children of Papa Joe, and in turn they were able to see everything their father had been able to see the whole time. And they knew he had lied to them. With this realization, the children had everything the children had ever known began to transform. The colossal fruits throughout the terrarium were suddenly overtaken by molds and fungi. The trees petrified and crumbled to dust before their eyes. For the first time in their lives, air pressure-driven wind poured into their realm, building into a screeching howl that caused the tree dust to obscure the light. In this wind, other foliage began to writhe and dance like serpents in perfect time with the whipping back and forth of Uncle Draco's tail, while the fountains of ambrosia became vats of distilled sludge. Day became night. 4 enormous walls of pitch darkness surrounded the children in their newfound liberation, and with that dark came a condensation and chill that brought a new excruciating agony that pushed out from within their hearts, as well as crushed their spirits from without by the great twin weights of carbon and gravity, suffocating them between icy, jagged sheets of loneliness. Thick blankets of frozen existential doom covered them. From each and every one of their newly formed orifici, there rose a great keening wail, slowly at first, but building gradually louder and louder until the sound became its own screeching, hollow gale of black, the wind that fills the passages between this world and the underworld. And this is what brought Papa Joe out of his nap. And when he woke, he discovered this horrific dissonance, found his precious creation had mutated beyond his control, and this sent him into such a despairing rage that he lashed out at his children and sent them all packing to a permanent timeout in the desert world beyond the ruined terrarium. And for this, they were ashamed and have remained so ever since. And then Papa Joe looked at his brother, cut his legs out from under him so that he would never look so charming and handsome again without some stigmata betraying his worldliness, and then told his brother, "Get the fuck out." Draco laughed as he slithered merrily out the door, but not before hearing his brother moaning, "Why? Why?" To which Draco paused, looked back over what used to be his shoulder, and said to his brother, "Should have paid me my money, bitch."
Flight. Haley is high again, standing on the porch, joint smoldering between two fingers when she sees it, a streak of light burning across the sky above her. She's been staring out over the tops of the corn, listening to the wind rustle the stalks. She blinks slowly as the light makes a wobbly loop in the air before nosediving into the corn, 75 feet in front of the house. There is a muffled thud as the object makes impact and the ground rolls, knocking her from her feet and onto the wet grass at the bottom of the stairs. Holy shit, she says, staring into the night, now silent. She tries to take a pull off the joint, but it's gone out in the fall. She fingers her lighter and thinks maybe she can just spark this roach again. Go upstairs, read a magazine, forget that something big and probably spooky just dropped from the sky and might now be out there in her corn. Haley drops the half-smoked joint into the grass and reflexively crushes it out with her heel. She grabs the flashlight that hangs inside the doorway and wishes this were one of those farmhouses that kept a rifle where the umbrellas were supposed to go. She has to close her eyes and breathe for a moment when she sees it. Him, rather. Enormous, stark naked, and crumpled into a tight little ball. The corn around him burnt and flattened into a ragged circle. He's a big man, and he fell far, and the earth around his shoulders and his head has bunched up upon impact like the folds of a blanket. He looks peaceful almost, as if he's just here in her cornfield taking a nap before he shoots off to outer space or wherever the fuck this type comes from. She remembers the first time they appeared on television. She remembers her mother saying, "Oh Lord, it's like watching the moon landing again." She thanks the THC still running its sluggish course through her body that she isn't totally freaking out right now. Instead, this big, huge person tucked into a fetal ball not more than 5 feet in front of her just seems kind of amusing, a leftover prop from one of the bigger farm Halloween spectaculars. "Mister," she says, timid, not really keen to see what happens when this fellow wakes up. "Mister, are you all right?" She steps forward, her feet now just inches from him. The dim beam from her flashlight pointed into the surprisingly soft features of his face. "Mister," she says again, leaning down, hand extended towards him. "Are you—" He is quite suddenly up and on his feet, his eyes two endless red holes staring down at her. Anger, rage even, billows off him, rooting her to the ground. Upright, he looks even bigger than Haley had first thought, almost 7 feet if she could guess, and some sort of previously unknown specimen of musculature. He cocks his head, his mouth clenched as if noticing she is there for the first time, and she knows she's gonna die, and that goddammit she wished she wasn't so high and on her way to meet St. Peter. "I'm okay," he says, the strength of his words actually pushing her back. He cocks his head in the other direction and squints his eyes. "I'm okay." So loud that Haley falls to the ground, her hands on her ears, her feet feebly kicking to get back, to get away from him. She fills her lungs with air and closes her eyes, and that she knows she is about to be dead, and she won't be able to fix the front screen or put flowers on her parents' grave this year. The house will be foreclosed, and the small sum of money she'd been saving for a trip somewhere, anywhere really, will probably get eaten up by debt collectors. "Ma'am?" His voice is quiet, stilted and heroic in the most theatrical sense, and at the sound of it, Haley opens one eye. "Are you okay?" The furnaces of his eyes have faded. He looks, aside from his size and lack of clothing, like any other very large man. "Ma'am, if you're okay, please tell me. What am I doing here?" It takes nearly an hour for Haley to move him from the corn into the house. He is weak, feeble even from the crash, and just getting him up onto his feet takes all of her strength. He's been near comatose since he last spoke, just staring blankly ahead, mouth pursed as they lurch from side to side through the corn and across the yard. The evening is warm, late summer, and by the time she pushes him through the front door and shakily guides him towards the couch, she is covered in sweat, her hair clinging to her forehead, a damp half circle attaching her cut-off tee to her back. He says nothing as she drapes his long, bulky frame over the ends of the sofa, the springs sagging visibly. Nothing even when she throws the quilt over his midsection, lifts his head and slides a pillow underneath. Nothing when she whispers to no one but the warm dark of the house, "I don't know what in the hell I'm doing right now." Later, Rick arrives. She hears the rattle of his engine up the road and can hear the badly greased suspension of his swamp tires creaking. She's outside, leaning against the porch again, when the beat-up truck sidles up in front of the house. Big Jim, Pete, and Flo pass a bottle around the exposed bed with Daryl seated next to Rick in the front seat. Rick's arm is slung over the door, and his greasy hair sticks down and out from a mesh baseball hat. Rick is tall and unhealthy skinny. He's wearing his usual scoop-necked wife beater, proud to show off the tats he's picked up from a few spells upstate. He throws the door open and saunters out, his mouth curled up in a sneer, his hat pulled low over his eyes. Rick doesn't say anything, just takes 2 long steps over and throws an arm around her waist, pulls her against him, his sweat boozy with a few nights drinking. "You ain't welcome here, Rick." She ducks her head and slips away from him, taking a few steps towards the house. They'd been a thing for a while after Haley's parents had passed. She'd been awarded a little inheritance, quit her job at the diner, and became a fixture at the bar, drinking to make the world spin a little slower. Rick had taken a liking to her and had taken it upon himself to buy her drink after drink till she was drunk enough each night to accompany him home. He'd been a fine distraction, dumb, futureless, easygoing with his drugs. It had been on and off for 6 months or so until Rick had pushed her hard against a wall when she wasn't in the mood one night. She'd put her knee in his stomach and left him gasping on the air in his living room floor. He'd called more than a few times, but they'd spoken rarely since. "Oh, Hales, you still sore?" The nasal southern twang that hung off Rick's speech was too much. Haley had always thought it was fake. "I was just a bit too drunk." Daryl chuckled in the front seat, well aware of what Rick could be like when he was too drunk. "Anyway, I came over because I was worried about you, Hales. There's a big-ass meteorite struck across the sky and seemed to crash land right here in this vicinity. I was worried that you might have been hurt, and as soon as I sobered up enough to drive, I came on over to check on you." The sneer has turned into an almost comical expression of innocence. Rick shrugs and holds his hand out. "I just want you to be safe, baby." Again, Daryl laughs. "I haven't noticed nothing tonight, and if you don't mind, I'd be happy if you and your boys got the fuck off my property." Someone in the back seat, Flo maybe, whistles. Rick takes a step forward, smiles, and opens his mouth to retort. "Are these men bothering you, miss?" That voice again, so loud it seems to take up space in the air. The big man is standing in the doorway now, still naked, a blanket wrapped around his waist, and everyone, Haley included, is staring up at him. "You?" He's talking to Rick now. Rick, who isn't scared of nothing, who's just staring back, his perma-sneer once more returned. "I believe this lady asked you to remove yourself. Do so. Now." Rick laughs, not a hint of nerves in it, and turns slowly towards Haley. "Not surprised you missed out on the comet, Hales." His voice tapers down to a low whisper. "It's good to know you're safe. Keep an eye out for anything that looks," and he nods up towards the big man in the doorway. "Suspicious." He takes 2 more long steps back towards the car and starts to get in before stopping and looking over his shoulder. "And you, big man? I can only imagine we'll meet again." The car rumbles to life. Big Jim throws the now empty bottle into the grass. Rick turns the radio up loud and they disappear down the road. He's still standing in the doorway, his expression a combination of confusion and self-satisfaction. "I hope those men did not bother you, ma'am." "I'm fine, thank you." She pauses, takes a deep breath. "I think it's best if we went inside, got some clothes on you, and sat down. Do you drink?" The big man sits across from her table, looking happily blank as if the crash has shaken loose the worries and left him just that, a big, powerful man. He has cracked the foil on a second bottle of wild turkey, and he takes loud, hungry gulps off the top, the booze seeming to have no effect on him. No shirt would fit his expansive chest, but he is wearing a pair of Haley's dad's sweatpants that expose most of his calves and look more like leggings than anything else. Haley nurses a warm beer second and stares out over his shoulder. It's almost 4:30 and the sky is beginning to lighten. "One more time. Tell me everything you can remember." Haley is tired, but the big man seems inexhaustible, and she doesn't exactly trust a 6'10" amnesic super being alone in her home. She's been keeping herself awake by trying to jog his memory. "I can crush things," he says, squishing his hands together to accentuate the point. "I can punch things very, very hard." The corners of his mouth turn up in a smile, some memory popping back into his head. "I once fought a 14-headed snake on a planet millions of light years from here. I once drove the sharp point of a spaceship through a small planet. Every person perished." His face tightens at this. Haley thinks she sees a glimmer of scarlet flicker in his eyes. "I once tore the president of a small South American country in 2. His blood got on my cape." His eyes are really starting to glow now. "I beat a man to death with his own arms once. I have seen entire villages born." The big man's voice goes quiet at this admission. He turns his massive head away, and when he looks back, the red glow has faded from his eyes, and his face seems fresh scrubbed of memory. Haley has to try and swallow the beer that she's been holding in her mouth. He is looking at her now, more youthful seeming than before, needing her to reply. I got kicked out of community college for hitting a girl in the face with my stiletto heel. She got 12 stitches and lost most of the vision in one eye. She rolls her eyes and exhales. I broke a high school boyfriend's hand in high school because I caught him fucking my best friend. The night my parents died, I skipped dinner to freebase coke and fucked some guy I barely knew. She feels a tear roll down her face. I don't even know why I'm telling you this. The first ray of sunlight cuts through the corn outside and finds its way through the window. Haley feels him reach out and touch her shoulder. She draws her hand across her face and looks up into his big blank eyes. I can fly. Flight, to Haley, feels like the gravitron at the country fair. The way the light bends around her vision, and no matter how hard she tries, she can't keep her eyes shut. Tears bead on her eyelashes before alighting into the air. He stops, without ceremony, one moment rocketing upwards, the other not, and she is breathlessly laughing, eyes closed against the brightness of the morning sky. Ma'am, you should look, he says. She can't say how high they are, but she can see what feels like everything in all directions. She can see her home, the barn, the scorched circle of corn from last night. She can see corn as far as the eye can see, and from this distance, she can see the country roads that cut the corn into squares and rectangles. In the far distance, she can see the city as if through a haze, and beyond it, she can see more corn and more towns, and just maybe the sun's glint off the top of some other city. She inhales the cold, high-altitude air. They hover in silence. Are you ready now, ma'am? He asks. I think so. It's warm when his feet finally touch the ground. He lowers her gently to her feet, and she lingers a second, her body leaned against his. Thank you for that, she says, the weight of this being perhaps the one great moment of her life already settling on her shoulders. He opens his mouth to reply, but the jagged grumble of a truck engine cuts him off. Rick's truck, no slow saunter this time, hurtles up the path, the boys in the back holding hard to the sides, trying to keep on. Rick slams on the brakes and the car skids to a halt in front of them. Kicked up dust blocks her vision, but she hears a car door slam and the cocking of a gun. Rick steps out of the dust with a stubby sawed-off shotgun in both hands, aimed at the big man. All right, you fucking asshole, back away from her. Rick's voice is nasally, almost erratic, hopped up on something outside of just booze. The dust is settling and she can see the outlines of the other boys resting against the truck, a variety of bats and chains dangling at their sides. Rick? Her voice catches in her throat. She tries to speak, but can only mutter, stop. Please. Behind her, the big man seems to swell, to grow even larger, and she can feel the hint of a vibration in the air around him. He steps forward in front of Haley, only 3 or 4 feet from the 2-sided barrel of Rick's gun. You will leave, he says, now. Fuck, I will. I'm set to put a hole in you if that's what it takes. When she looks back later on the event, she can't say if Rick was trying to fire the gun, or if his hands were too wet, or if he was just so high he bobbled it, but the gun goes off, the full brunt of 2 cartridges striking the big man in the chest. A spray of ricocheted buckshot cuts across her face, and she raises her hand instinctively, so that when the big man lashes out and hit Rick's, she only sees it through the cracks of her fingers. Rick doesn't explode so much as evaporate into nothing. One moment he is there, living, breathing, threatening with him a gun. The next he is nothing, a thin, red mist, and the soft clunk of the shotgun falling to the ground. The big man stumbles backwards. He looks at Haley, his eyes big and wide, lined with fear, looking as if he might apologize or cry. His gaze holds a moment on Haley, morose and confused, before his eyes turn that pulsating red, any hint of recognition no longer present, and then he too is gone, the blast of air that kicks out from his departure strong enough to force her to the ground. Haley tries to breathe, sharp, rasping gasp. She hears someone near the truck throw up, and someone, maybe Flo, maybe Daryl, yell that they need to get the fuck out of there. The engine rattles to life, and she feels the spray of gravel as the truck's wheels fishtail and then careen down the road. She tries to stand, but settles on just rocking back and forth, staring ahead into the fields. Facing this direction, from this angle, Haley can't see anything, only the tall green stalks of the corn already starting to wither. Thank you.
Being willing to be haunted. My grandmother knit the ocean.
Up all night with bargain basement yarn, she watched her old nature shows, brow furrowed. She worked fish by fish, red fish, blue fish, pink and orange polka dot vodka fish. She finished each fish with a knot and prayer spit and set it out to sea, which was her room in my mother's house, painted blue. Sometimes she switched needles and made coral reef, crocheting as fast as she could, every color but white. My grandma died, and the ocean died. Both left blue rooms, one full, one empty. Now, in my apartment where the walls are ripped up, I shake a breaded fish substitute onto the counter. I scoop out the flesh. My phone rings. I don't recognize the sound. A text message from you. The first in weeks projects onto the torn walls. I found one of your books, it says. I hope you're okay. I reach for the phone, but my fingernails are lengthening, turning dark. Not yet, I think. The phone falls through my newly thick hands. I think of my grandmother's hands finishing a clownfish. Habibti, she said, and there was a word she would say that I can't remember. I try to text you back. No, I type. Yes, I type. Can we talk? I try to type. Ellipses swim on the walls, but you don't reply. I'm running out of time. Here's the thing. Last month, after we fought, I ghosted you. Ghosting used to mean you don't answer someone's texts. Now it means something different. You go to a special clinic down on Van Ness, and they hand you a form, and they handed me a form. The form says, do you accept the terms and conditions of the procedure? Yes, I wrote. Do you accept that the infusion is permanent? Yes, I wrote. Sex. F, I wrote, options being limited. Emergency contact. I put you. Anna doesn't want me. I hesitated over the last question. Species preference. I wrote none. I shared the waiting room with a guy my age, bleached hair, skinny jeans, and cheekbones in too tight pants too low on his hips. Me and this guy, we watched the video about the ghosting procedure. Science calls it something different. We hear the words hope, DNA, hereditary material, extinct species. After the video, he picked up the magazine and put it down and picked it up and put it down, and I knew he was going to talk to me 10 minutes before he did. And he opened his mouth and he said, what made you want to ghost? Me, I said, oh, the usual. Loss of you, loss of popcorn nights, loss of conversation and reading old novels together and laughing and 2 a.m. toast, loss of that word. Him. Same, he says. Like I hadn't noticed that his body was missing a body and that body was his. Internet forums say that it helps to have a recent absence for the ghost to take. But we all know nothing to lose works too. A missing love, a missing limb, 1,000 missing white blood cells. They called his name. He got up willingly and went through the doors. This is how science says ghosting works. DNA blah, retro something blah, mapping, what's it, splicing, injection, grafting, preservation of extinct species in living carriers. This is how ghosting actually works. Imagine a box, cardboard. If you kick it, it moves a little too much. It makes a sound like there's something inside. The next step is, imagine someone could wear the shape of that box. Picture a kid in a Halloween tiger mask, but the kid is gone. Picture a fish flapping in an empty room. Those were the first trials. Science apologizes. We forgave science like you won't forgive me. The next step is to imagine that someone could hold the shape of that empty box inside their shape for the rest of their life. It's not like sharing a bed. It's not like grafting an apricot branch to a plum tree. It is your DNA turned into a factory for future DNA of extinct species until the day the world is safe enough and we can let the ghosts out. Until then, it's a short life, but a less lonely life. Picture the outline of a person with a fish swimming where the absence used to be. TLDR, I wake up in a dentist chair, hungry for fish, with a small hairball of consciousness that isn't mine. The part of me that once held you is going, replaced with a part of me that remembers things I don't remember, like ice caps. After the procedure, bleach-haired boy and I go out for drinks because we don't know what else to do. We're dizzy, we have bandages around our arms, his left, my right. The bartender looks at us and stands us each a beer. When he turns away to pour, I notice his shoulder blades are too pronounced, his dark skin catching the light, threatening wings. The boy and I, we try to talk about what it feels like. I say, it's like I remember things, but they're not in words, like the feeling of ice under my... He says, it's like I'm carrying something else inside me. And then he leans back in his chair, belly up. I feel different, I say, hungry. My jaw hurts with an absence. I feel different, he says, graceful. And he basks in the light of the bar. We sip. So, what did they give you, he asks me. I look at my release form. It says, polar bear, I say, extinct 2030. Monk seal, he says, as if I'd asked, 2025. We both drink. I want to joke that they probably thought I'd be a safer polar bear. I can feel the outline of my body expanding, or maybe that's just what it feels like to go so long without touch. You grow a protective layer, you grow fur. I tear into my sushi. Seal boy edges away. The polar bear I am ghosting won't let me forget plastic, like how it crowds your throat above the water and you can't breathe. Like the inflatable raft we brought to the lake, you and me, the lake we drove to in a car that was itself ghosting dinosaurs. We didn't think that way at the time. We floated on the surface in our plastic raft until you flipped it over and we almost drowned trying to kiss. And I gave you a word and I want that word back. The bear won't let me forget glass, like the bottle of wine we drank on the shore. Polar bears don't mate for life, and polar bears are not monogamous, so the part that won't forgive me is not the polar bear. Our lake is mostly gone now. A few inches of sludge and a few weeds and the imprint of water, and if I could only have a word back, the word my grandmother gave the fish and the word I gave you, I might not be out here looking for cold water in an endless empty summer. So the coral reef is gone, but in my grandmother's house, it's still there in yarn. It's not perfect, but you can stand in her doorway and squint and imagine how it was. A blue room with everything alive and everything eating and every mouth open to brine. You can almost imagine the water spilling out under her door. If you stare at those yarn fish long enough, one of them will stir. When I was 10, my grandma took me to the zoo, and I remember the polar bear, its fur yellow from zoo food and city smog, and it crawled onto the plastic ice cap, and I try to remember its movements now, the way it turned and huffed at us. Sometimes in college, after my grandma died, I would look down at my hands and find them wrinkled. I'd remember her saying Habibti and then words I couldn't remember or understand. See, some ghost lines are extinct forever. Language they didn't pass on to you. A bird singing for its mate, the absence of a person from your life, the melt of snow. These days, I walk down the street ghosting polar bear. It feels like stepping into a skin that extends far beyond me, all muscles and claws where I used to be soft. It never wants to stop, bigger than me, this feeling of size. Not yet, I think, but sometimes I lose myself in the way people step out of my path. I walk the drifting sidewalks, snowy streets, walls with windows like ice. I watch the wind that gathers snow and curls softly against the buildings. I draw myself up so tall I can swipe at streetlights. I drop from sidewalk to street and I'm surprised when I can't immediately swim. Between two ice shoals in a cafe, I see someone who looks like you, and I fall hard back into a small human shape. Home alone, I hold the last of my grandmother's fish with my fingers becoming claws, and I remember the ocean the way it was, a blue room where everything eats. Or maybe that was my grandmother's room, I can't remember. I close my eyes, I listen for my phone, I hear ice cracking, I hear water. Seal Boy is starting to look good to me these days when we meet for drinks. It's the new sleekness of his hips, his small eyes, the way his stubble started growing sideways, the peach fuzz on his rounding cheeks. We're at that place. It's the bar where you can also dance around him. I don't say the word club. He holds his martini glass with his whole hand wrapped around the stem like a fin and then spills it all over the bar. And when he dances, he wiggles invitingly. I want to take him to that bathroom with the punk rock band posters on the walls and maul him. You want to dance, he asks, getting close to me. No, thank you, I say, as if waving off salmon. There is a new patch of fur on the inside of my thighs. I check my phone. Nothing. When you finally text, it's hard to read. Coffee next week? My nails have grown so long I can't retract them anymore. I try to get a beer out of the fridge, but my paws won't fit the door handle. Sure, coffee sounds great. In the week before seeing you, I love hard on a soft boy whose binder becomes a carapace. Black and red and shiny, it separates us, we separate. Necrophorus, he apologizes. Beetle? I ask. He nods. Extinct 2018. He moves to put on his shoes, but he throws them into a bag instead. He doesn't need them anymore. His articulated legs click on the ground on his way out. I want to say goodbye, but my vocal cords are thickening. I envy him his exoskeleton. I envy him his willingness. At the cafe, you're early. You're sitting with your back to the wall. I walk across the ice to you, my paws on the linoleum. We apologize to one another. You look so good, like you did at the lake. Your skin is so hairless. Your shoulders are drawn back. You hand me a thing with a hard spine and pages. Stand up, I tell myself. My spine wants to bend. My shadow is bigger than I remember it. You tell me I look good. My knees are soft. Stand up, I tell myself. I listen for a word. You look past me at the door. There are places I can't go back to. Your apartment with the green couch, the cold water, your bed. I struggle with balance. Outside the cafe, a small man grips the lamppost with his fingers and turns his head all the way around to blink at me. When you get up to go, I find my all fours. Seal Boy texts me and says, "You want to come over?" And this time I do. His jeans hug his little round waist, which spills over invitingly. I search his neck blubber for a vein, and then I find it, I grow teeth. I ride the train under a full moon. At every station, when the doors open, I hear sounds I've never heard before. Not cars, not trains, not phones, but arrhythmic sounds, mating calls, creaking, inviting. Of course, there could still be time for the last of the ice caps to melt and the seawater to rise and begin rolling over the city. There is still time for a chill to set. There must be still time, I think, to fix things or to tell someone younger than me what a fish looks like. A fish looks like this, in case anyone wants to know. Shiny blue thrift store yarn, my grandmother's hands, a knitting needle through the gills, a knot tightening, and a warm, jasmine-scented voice telling us something that, if we could just remember it, might keep us real for the rest of our lives.
The Det Bardo.
We're also going to work in heaven. Now, that may even sound more like hell to some people, working in heaven. But remember, God created us to be workers. Work was a gift from God before the fall of Adam and Eve. God meant for us to find fulfillment in our work. He's a worker. He created us to be workers. But in heaven, the new heaven and the new earth, all of the things that drain the joy out of our work, bodies that grow tired, strained relationships, government regulations, all those things will be removed, and we're going to enjoy work like God intended us to enjoy.
On March 27th, 2081, the Angel Aid belonging to Pastor CEO Bobby Jeffress V detected a nanospike bullet blasting through his ribcage in a spiral of collapsing shockwaves, shredding his heart and lungs in an instant. Within 6 milliseconds, the brain stasis protocols had kicked in. The death retrojector flooded his bloodstream with hypercoagulants and oxygenated eumorphine to slow any biopacket loss at the shock of death, then beamed one last neural map to the cloud before the bullet had even exited his back. It all happened so quickly that Bobby didn't even realize he'd been assassinated until he woke up in a server bank outside Dallas, Texas, to the tune of Lord of All Power. God damn it, thought Bobby, or at least a 99.1% retrojection of Bobby. God damn it, what the fuck happens? 2080 had been the most profitable year in the history of the post-death economy, and it was all thanks to Bobby. It had only taken a few centuries of mudraking, strike-breaking, fear-flinging, pleasure-shaming, wage-slaving, and moral gaslighting for capitalist Protestantism to finally crush the human spirit enough to accept the indignity of working after death. Decades of climate catastrophes had finally stained the skies orange and poisoned the water tables for good. And after the population collapses of the 2070s, global capitalism faced an existential problem. Billions of debt and germ-ridden consumers were coughing their last breaths without paying their earthly debts. 100 trillion mortgages wiped off the books. 300 trillion in college tuition vanished in a wave of mass defaults at death. Nearly a half a quadrillion in subprime medical tranches that the Fed threatened to let expire. How could a 500 million Americans possibly pay off the debts of a 500 million dead? And more importantly, how could the ever-growing class of trillionaires avoid having their offshore crypto hoards liquidated and their asses turned to soup? Bobby pinged his Omni to call his son, his business cabal, his mistresses, anyone. But the code that Bobby himself signed off on worked exactly as designed. He would not be allowed an outgoing call until he earned it. At the global minimum wage of $7.26 an hour, oh yes, it should take about 6 weeks' work. The stars flashed a little faster in the sky. He picked one, and his neural map ascended to the heavens around it like a new constellation. The star began to shout at him. I've been on hold for 10 minutes. Why does Sexfinity even use angels if I still have to be on hold? Of course, ma'am, I apologize. How may I aid you? Y'all raised my Sexfinity service by $6,000 last month. I can't afford that. I'm switching to Occam's Gay Sirs if you don't reduce it. Of course, ma'am. I'm authorized to offer you a price match. And they're throwing in the new Omni, too. I want new Omnis for my whole family. Bobby switched off his emotional reaction protocol and cranked his time accelerometer up 20 times. Let me see what I can do about that, ma'am. Bobby coined the name himself, Angel Aids. Automated, instantaneous death retrojection with 99.1% memory retention, held in a neural map capable of performing telework after death. Imagine the possibilities. Grandparents could pay off their great-great-great-grandchildren's college debts. Cancer victims could pay off their own wasted medical loans. Mothers could die in childbirth and still help their children pay down the average $1 million in birth debt. What a blessing from God, not just to shareholders, but to the hopelessly indebted, unlanded class, who made up about 96% of all humans by 2080. AI and automation had squeezed workers out of most manual jobs, but emotional labor would always be in demand, especially as the last evergreens turned to everbrowns, and the future of humanity seemed destined to play out in sunless underground bunkers. The board of First Baptist LLC agreed that such a drastic solution shouldn't be dropped into the public lap without a few years of cultural pre-banding. First Baptist pastors sermonized on loved ones stealing from future generations with their fiscal irresponsibility. Amazon released a new anti-superhero tragicomedy about a retrojection of an NSA agent who fights Antifa eco-terrorists on Facebook. Private prisons and hospitals quietly began to retrofit their pandemic wards into stasis wards and their mortuaries into server banks. The 2080 vice presidential candidates were asked their opinion on deregulating dead work, the first time such a phrase had been pushed onto the American psyche. The Free World Order candidate stated simply that any regulation would be an affront to God himself. The Democrat candidate responded that they would only support deregulation if a provision were added to ensure dead work access to minority and small principal first-generation debtors operating out of high-debt neighborhoods for at least 3 years. 7 weeks later, a blue star appeared in Bobby's heaven. He had spent his first 2 weeks dead working as a telecom rep, the third as a sex line troubleshooter, and the last 4 as an emotional escort. Bobby switched his behavior protocol from supportive Dom back to pre-death persona and pinged his son, Robert Jeffers VI, who didn't seem very happy to see him. Junior, my God, what the hell happened? Last thing I remembered was stepping down to shake hands at the Sunday crowds. One of those queer Antifa Marxist terrorists finally got you, Daddy. Snuck in a printed nanospike, hidden up their cyber pussy. Security got him, but it was too late for you. Why the hell am I in the angel clouds? Junior's face scrunched up. You didn't pay your debts, Daddy. Gotta get there same as... God damn it, Junior, I am not in debt. What's going on? Why couldn't Junior look him in the eyes? Or at least a 99.1% retrojection of his eyes. Dad, Disney Stone liquidated everything you had, and they say you're still $12 million in the hole. The auditors were pinging me before I knew you were even dead. I had $1 billion in Disney Stone and First Baptist in my accounts. You had $840 million in some change, Daddy, but most of it was out of the money calls from before Angel Aid went to market. First Baptist tanked when you died, and Disney Stone exercised your options at the bottom, as is their rights. His face darkens. And it wasn't just them. The IRS and the SEC came knocking, say you owe even more from settlements you never told us about, whose families are breaking their non-disclosures now that you can't pay. The FBI have multiple ongoing investigations. Fuck those Marxists, Junior. What about the Cayman account? The Filipino mission? I'm telling you, you old liar, they got it all. God forbid we'll all be in debt by the time this is through. I can't believe what you got your family into. Don't you dare. $12 million. And you can rot in hell after you pay it off. I knew you were an evil man. Evil. What you did to those kids, The call cut off. His time was up. God damn it all. He switched off his emotional reaction protocol and pinged another star that was pulsing pink this time. Hey, Angel. What's wrong, baby? You double-charged my last sesh. I want an extra hour. Of course, baby. You just relax and tell me, how was your day? Terrible, just terrible. Where do I start? $12 million would take over about 2 centuries emotional labor to earn. His most gullible parishioners started a GodFundMe to pay it down. But when Bobby's Omni was unhashed and the victims of his secret crimes started testifying in mass the months after his death, First Baptist LLC and their parent company, Disney Stone, disallowed Bobby's debt to be paid by outside entities. By 2082, Bobby decided to switch off his emotional reaction protocol for good. Over the next century, he would occasionally try to see how long he could go without answering any of the stars. But the Angel Aid environment worked exactly as designed. Without a body, there was no pleasure to distract him from his tickets. Without any relationships, he had no one but the stars to talk to. Without any government regulation, he had no possible recourse against the exploitation of this digital Bardo, where the blinking stars were all there was and ever would be until he worked enough to die. As Hallelujah had it, he would not labor the full 2 centuries. By the year 2201, long after his family had gone to heaven, the galaxy of glowing tickets had dwindled to a few constellations, and soon just one last golden light blinking in his sky. The angel of his salvation did not look like the Bible foretold. They were gorgeous, wearing something between a suit and a gown, of a gender and genetic makeup his 21st century fundamentalist brain could not conceive. Hello, post-dead of Via Disney Stone. I am Chairman Muxalo Key of the United Non-Incorporated Earth. I'm excited to announce that the hellish practice of post-death wage slavery has finally been abolished by people's decree. Your false debts, which were made in bad faith by thieves and liars, have been canceled. You are now free to join the deity, oneness, or nothingness of your faith. For those who wish to see the wonders of the 23rd century, you may download your retrojection to a cyborg frame provided to you by the states. Bobby closed the feed and switched on his emotional protocols for the first time in centuries. And for the first time post-death, he bawled like a baby. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Despite a century of debt and ego dissolution, his American televangelist upbringing had survived like a cancer around his heart. Deep down, he knew the shame and loathing at the core of his being would only be relieved when St. Peter himself said he was a good boy. Now that Bobby had finally paid off his sins, he had no intention of being put into a goddamn socialist cyborg body. No way in hell. The Angel Aid servers seemed able to read his longing. His neural map ascended to the heavens one last time, where there were no more blinking stars to be answered, only a vast and welcoming black. The entangled strands of self-referential code that had been Bobby's neural map disentangled back into the ether where they belonged. And this time, deep down, no matter what he'd ever said in those godforsaken sermons, he really fucking hoped he wouldn't have to work in heaven. Night.
So much. Thank you so much to all of our performers. Thank you, Ploi, Pirapokin, Convoy, Wharfs. Thank you, Heidi, Kasa, for a grief that shatters oceans. Paul, Corman-Roberts, and They Were Ashamed. Noah Sanders, Flight. Carson, Beker, Willing to be Haunted. And Mike, Iafolla, The Debt Bardo. Finally, Bhat, who has guided us on this musical journey with his suite of synthesizers. We would love for you to perform at the next Club Chicxulub. Look out for our website. Submissions open on January 1st. Thank you so much. Oh, wait, and we have a tip jar, so I'm going to run around. If you like the readers, we will be distributing this amongst the readers, so thank you so much. I'm Lauren C. Johnson with Matt Carney and Bhat. This is Club Chicxulub.